My name is TJ Scott. This is my Chapter 25 Business Law presentation. Presentation. Um, Chapter summary. I apologize. It's been a long day. Um, Chapter 25 is one of those chapters. I believe this is my last chapter summary. And it's one with a lot of details, a lot of vocabulary terms, a lot of little things to understand before going forward with the big information. Chapter 25 to me is one of those chapters that the normal layperson might not understand right away what you're talking about, but it's also something that can greatly impact your future as well as allow you to do more things going forward. Chapter 25 is one of those things with debtor, um, creditor, that people put off. They allow professionals to take care of something. They pay somebody to take care of these things. But in reality, when you have a better understanding of it, you have a better chance of protecting yourself, as well as more knowledge about your own money, as well as the economy. So I'm going to do my best to get through this in under 5 minutes because a lot of my chapter summaries have been way too long, and I apologize for that. So going forward, a creditor is the lender in the transaction, a debtor is a borrower in the transaction. It's important to know these things because, um, we're going to leave a private school here in the next few years with plenty of debt um, and somebody to pay it back to. So a lien, I believe that's how it's pronounced, is a claim on a debtor's property that must be satisfied before any creditor can make a claim. Going forward with that, there's two different types. There's a mechanic's lien placed on a real property of a debtor when the latter does not pay for the work done by the creditor. These are just ways for people to protect their businesses or protect their services by kind of holding you accountable or holding something else accountable. That's important to you. An artisan's lien enables a creditor to recover payment from a debtor for labor and services provided on the debtor's personal property. It includes attachment, writ of execution, and garnishment. Rights and remedies for debtors. Exemptions to attachments. Homestead exemption prevents a person from losing his or her home if forced into bankruptcy or faced with a claim from an unsecured creditor. I'm not exactly sure how you go about getting these things. It kind of touches on it a little bit, but not directly how to handle it. I think this happens a lot when people are more or less in a tight spot, when the business kind of dies out or something similar to that. Personal properties are exempt. Goal of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code to allow equitable distribution of the debtor's property among debtor's creditors. Basically, equal distribution among the people that you owe money to. Not one person is going to get more than the other. I'm not sure how that varies based on how much debt you may owe. If it's an insurmountable debt to one person or one company, whatever it may be, and it's something more controlled to another company, I'm not sure how they adjust those things. Discharge the debtor from its debts, enabling the debtor to rehabilitate itself and start fresh. I think of the Office episode where Michael declares bankruptcy. It's a way to kind of throw things away, I guess, but it's not an easy way out. I think this chapter, just by presenting it right there with that simple line, makes it seem like it's very easy. It's not an easy process, and it's not one you want to go about whatsoever. That's going to follow you somehow, some way. It's not necessarily an easy way out to go bankrupt. Preserve ongoing business relationship, part of the bankruptcy code, and to stabilize commercial usage. It's a way to protect businesses. The video reaction was on some of these things. Bankruptcy management proceedings. Excuse me. U.S. district courts have exclusive jurisdiction over all bankruptcy cases. I've actually got to sit in on a couple of these cases before with some businesses that my parents had dealt with. That it's complicated, but basically money was coming from different companies supplied to my parents' companies. Those companies ended up going bankrupt with some criminal acts, but I got to sit in on some of these cases. It's kind of crazy how these things all unfold, as well as the contact with the people that are going bankrupt, um, and also how they're doing today. Immediately, I think people, when they think of bankruptcy, whether it be a company or a person, you immediately think of that person that can't afford anything. They're broke, they lost everything. But in some cases, there are ways out. I think that's important to understand. Bankruptcy petitions, voluntary and involuntary. Um, Bankruptcy management proceedings, bankruptcy schedules, lists and statements to be submitted after a debtor files a voluntary petition. Prepared to the assistance of attorneys who specialize in bankruptcy law. When it comes to bankruptcy, you have to ensure that somebody's right by your side and knows anything and everything, the ins and outs of bankruptcy, and managing that debt to creditors. Automatic stay, discharge, bankruptcy estate exemptions. Estate exemptions is a list of exempt properties and assets. State exemptions, states are permitted to allow their own exemptions and fraudulent transfers. Courts can void fraudulent transfers of the debtor's property. Automatic stay, immediate suspension of the creditor's activities once the debtor files for bankruptcy. When all the requirements are met, the court relieves the debtor of responsibility to pay its debts. That's discharge. These are all ways kind of around things and ways to approach them. Straight bankruptcy, debtor turns all assets over to a trustee. Trustee sells non-exempt assets to distribute the proceeds of the creditors. When you turn these things over, it's important to understand that these assets are given monetary values. Doesn't matter what it is, and they're going to approach it how they see fit. It's not available to partnerships and limited liability companies, LLCs, corporations under federal bankruptcy code, so the discharge of debts isn't available to these exemptions. A couple precedent cases. The wage earners plan, a portion of the consumer debtor's earnings is paid into a court for distribution to creditors over 3 years. A lot of companies, from what I understand, utilize this method, say, not necessarily within bankruptcy, but when the company is in a tough spot, they owe a lot to debtors, to creditors rather. Say it's a bank and the bank needs its money right away, so they end up suing. And then over time, these things are paid off. Chapter 11 bankruptcy aims at financially troubled businesses or individuals, provides businesses with an opportunity to reorganize and continue to function, and discharge debts by selling its assets. I'm not really sure how the function works after the assets are sold off. I'm not really sure how much that complicates those people within the business and the business itself. Chapter 12 bankruptcy applicable to family farmers and family fishermen. By the way, family fisherman thing is the coolest job I think I've ever seen. Family farmers, individuals or spouses with a debt of less than $3 million rather, and at least 50% of it's related to farming. 50% gross income is from farming. I think that's more how it's applied. Chapter 12 is not something you're primarily going to hear about. Obviously, if you are a farmer, family fisherman, these are things you're going to hear about. I'm not really sure why it applies to those specific people. Maybe it's because their income is strictly based on their work, directly related and correlated to the behaviors of outlying factors. New Bankruptcy Law 2011, Amendment of 2005 Bankruptcy Abuse and Prevention Consumer Protection Act. That was a mouthful. Technical corrections affected the power of the court, public access to papers, debtor reporting requirements, case administration, priorities of creditors' claims. The freedom to contract doctrine. Parties who are legally competent are allowed to enter contracts of their choice. Big timeline there. You need to understand that. When you're competent, you enter into a contract. There's no way it's legally binding at that point. And there's no way to get out of it, especially in credit. When a creditor's after you, whether that be before or after, doesn't matter. It's legally binding. Those contracts are entered and they are nearly impossible to get out of. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, functions, leading federal consumer protection act agency, composed of a chairperson for 4 commissioners. They're going to do those investigations. They're going to find out of deceptive practices. They're going to do everything that they can to find out how real these situations are. The Truth in Lending Act, the goals, make creditors disclose all terms of credit arrangement before they enter into agreement. This is the way of protecting the consumers, protecting service industry, being completely transparent, no hidden agenda within the creditor. It's important to understand these things for a college student. Going forward, general disclosure also has to deal with the amount of money that is loaned. Credit Card Accountability Responsibility Disclosure Act of 2009 instituted new provisions on rates, fees, disclosures, and notices. Looks like they revamped the entire thing based on the chapter when it goes into more reading the chapter. It looks like everything was kind of revamped, specifically accounted for the economy and how it was controlled in 2009 and the years before it. Fair Credit Reporting Act, basically just making sure that credit information received by credit agencies is credible. There was a lot of objectives covered throughout this chapter, a lot of little things, a lot of acts within it. I apologize, my video was 12 minutes long. There's a lot of things to know, kind of dive into, and if you want to get into this profession, there's a lot of little tiny details that you need to understand. But having a general idea of how creditor-debtor relationships work and understanding what you're getting yourself involved to going forward is the most important part of this chapter. Thank you.